Something just shifted out there, and I need you to hear this before you make a single plan for the rest of this week, because the story everyone is telling you right now is not the full story. You've probably seen the headlines saying relief is on the way, that the heat is finally breaking, that a cooler pattern is about to sweep in and save us all. And look, there is some truth buried in that. But the newest data tells a much harder story underneath it. And if you only hear the comfortable version, you are going to be caught off guard. Because right behind whatever relief is coming, there is something building that is going to hit a lot harder than people expect. And at the same time, out over open water, a system is spinning up that has the potential to turn into a real problem within days. This is one of those weeks where the atmosphere is not messing around, and I would rather you hear it straight from me right now than scroll past a headline that only tells you half the picture. So if you want the complete version, the one that actually prepares you instead of just making you feel good for 20 minutes, stay with me, because we are going to go through every piece of this together. Hit that subscribe button before we start, because once you see what's coming at the end of this pattern, you are going to want to be here for the updates. Let's get into it. I want to start with what's happening right now, because before we talk about next week, we have to deal with today, and today is not a quiet day. Over the last 24 hours, a series of storms rolled through multiple regions and left real damage behind them. Wind gusts tore through parts of the interior, trees came down, power lines came down with them, and as of this morning, there are still a significant number of homes and businesses sitting without electricity. Crews have been out since before sunrise trying to get ahead of it, but in some of the hardest hit pockets, people are waking up to a second morning in the dark. That is the backdrop we are walking into today. A region that just got hit is now bracing for another round, and I want to walk you through exactly where the risk sets up so you know whether you need to be paying attention or whether you can relax a little today. The headline threat again today is wind. Straight line wind gusts are going to be the dominant story, the kind that snap weak branches, topple already stressed trees, and knock the power right back out in places that just got it restored a few hours ago. That is frustrating, I know, but it is also very predictable. And predictable means you can prepare for it. Charge your devices now if you are in the path of this. Bring in anything loose from your yard. Do not wait until the wind is already howling to figure out where your flashlights are. Now, there is also a narrow window for something more serious today, and I want to be precise about this rather than throwing a blanket warning over half the country, because that does not help anyone, and it just trains people to tune out real warnings when they matter most. The one corridor, where a spin-up tornado is genuinely plausible today, runs through a fairly narrow band in the central part of the country. Everywhere outside of that band, I'm not convinced the ingredients truly come together for organized rotation today. So if you happen to be sitting in that corridor, that is where you want to keep one eye on the sky this afternoon and evening. Everyone else, the story is wind and heavy downpours, not rotation. Here is how the day unfolds hour by hour, because the timing actually matters a lot for how you plan your afternoon. Early on, expect a cluster of storms to fire up over the northern and central plains, rolling through the late morning hours and pushing into early afternoon. As the afternoon heat builds, a second separate cluster develops farther west, catching the higher terrain and the adjacent lower elevations with sharp, fast-moving cells. But the system to really watch is the one sliding in from the west central states and pushing east through the afternoon and evening. That is the one carrying the bulk of today's severe potential, and it is the one most likely to still be producing damaging gusts well after dark. As night falls, these storms are expected to consolidate into more of a connected line, and once that happens, the threat shifts. It becomes less about isolated rotation and more about a broad swath of damaging straight-line winds and torrential rainfall moving through overnight. Before that consolidation happens, though, in that window during the evening, there is a real chance for a few stronger, more organized cells, the kind that can briefly produce something more dangerous before everything lines up and smooths out. Now here is the part of today's setup that I find genuinely interesting from a forecasting standpoint, and understanding it tells you exactly why the risk concentrates where it does, instead of spreading evenly across the whole region. Farther north in today's severe zone, the winds high up in the atmosphere are relatively weak. When the upper-level winds are weak like that, storms tend to behave more like simple wind and rain producers, rather than rotating supercells, because you need a real change in wind speed and direction with height to get a storm spinning. But slide farther south into the zone I mentioned a moment ago, and those upper-level winds crank up noticeably. That changes exactly why the tornado risk concentrates there and nowhere else today. Stronger winds aloft give storms the twist they need, and when you combine that with the instability sitting in the atmosphere right now, the fuel that thunderstorms feed on, those cells can hold together and stay dangerous well into the overnight hours. And that overnight timing is its own separate concern, because storms that roll through while people are asleep are the ones that catch communities off guard. If you are in a warning-prone area tonight, make sure your phone alerts are turned on before you go to bed. Do not rely on hearing sirens if you are already asleep. Tomorrow, the action shifts east. Overnight storms track across the interior through the early morning hours, and by afternoon, everything reorganizes as it pushes toward the coast. This is where I think the threat could actually get bumped up a notch, because the line of storm setting up looks capable of producing widespread damaging wind gusts, the kind that can bring down trees and power lines across a wide swath rather than just isolated spots. Tomorrow does not look like a tornado day to me. It looks like a wind day, plain and simple, but a wind day that a lot of densely populated areas need to take seriously. Because when gusts like that move through heavily populated corridors, the outage numbers can climb fast. Before I move forward, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely read every comment, so take a second and tell me, have the storms already reached your area this week? Tell me your town and what you actually saw, whether it was wind damage, a power outage, hail hammering your roof, or just a wall of rain that flooded your street. And just as importantly, tell me the one thing you always keep ready for when the power goes out, because your answers genuinely help other people in this community who might be facing their very first big outage and have no idea where to start. Some of the best advice that ever shows up on this channel comes straight from you in that comment section. So let's build that list together right now. Now let's turn to the tropics, because there are two very different stories playing out in two different oceans, and you need to understand both of them, not just the scary one. Let's start with the system that actually has my attention, because that is where the real, immediate uncertainty sits. There is an area of disturbed weather out over open water right now, and the latest model guidance is giving it a fairly high chance of organizing into a tropical depression over the coming days, with further strengthening possible as it tracks generally westward at a modest forward speed. Here's the part that keeps me watching this one closely. The intensity guidance suggests this system has the potential to strengthen quickly once it gets going, potentially climbing from a weak tropical system to something considerably stronger in a fairly short window of time. The broader pattern in the atmosphere right now favors a steering flow that could carry the system uncomfortably close to populated areas within the next several days, depending on exactly how the track evolves from here. I want to be careful and honest with you about this because some of the areas that could be affected have already been through a rough stretch recently. People there are tired, some of them are still cleaning up from the last system that came through, and the last thing anyone wants to hear is that another one might be lining up behind it. The one piece of good news, if there is any right now, is that the average of the model guidance keeps the core of this system somewhat offshore rather than pointing toward a direct worst-case strike. But, and this is critical, impacts from a tropical system reach far beyond wherever the exact center ends up. Even a track that stays offshore can still bring dangerous surf, gusty winds, and heavy rain to coastal communities. Some of the guidance points toward gusts strong enough to bring down tree limbs and cause scattered power outages, with the possibility of stronger impacts if the system tracks even a little closer or intensifies faster than the more conservative scenarios suggest. And the rain is genuinely what worries me the most about this one. In areas with steep terrain, heavy tropical rainfall becomes dangerous fast, because that terrain funnels water into narrow channels and can turn a heavy rain event into flash flooding or a mudslide with very little warning. Some of the model guidance points toward the possibility of several inches of rain piling up in a short window, with the wetter solutions bringing even heavier totals than that. So, to anyone in the potential path of this system, I am not telling you to panic. I am telling you to pay close attention over the next few days and to listen to your local officials the moment they start issuing guidance, because it genuinely looks like this could become a real concern, and you already know from experience how fast conditions can turn. Now let's cross over to the other basin, because here the story flips completely, and it is actually reassuring. As things stand right now, there is nothing significant being flagged over the next several days in that basin. Nothing organizing, nothing worth losing sleep over. And this has honestly been the theme of the season so far in that part of the world. So let me explain why. Because understanding the reason behind it is far more useful than just hearing the headline that it's quiet. Normally, as we push deeper into the season, we start seeing large high-pressure systems set up that steer developing storms around and sometimes toward land. That is always the region forecasters watch closely this time of year. But this season, the broader atmospheric pattern has been actively working against development in that basin. The reason comes down to one dominant force playing out on the other side of the globe. We are dealing with a strengthening large-scale ocean atmosphere pattern, and forecasters are increasingly confident this becomes a notably strong event as we move deeper into the fall. A pattern like this tends to crank up the wind shear across the tropical basin in question, and wind shear is when winds blow at different speeds and directions at different heights in the atmosphere. For a young, disorganized tropical system trying to get its act together, that kind of shear is brutal. It tilts the developing storm over, rips apart the thunderstorms it needs to survive, and shreds it before it ever really gets going. Layer on top of that a persistent blanket of dry, dusty air drifting across the basin, and you end up with a 1-2 punch that has kept a lid on activity there all season. Developing tropical systems need warm, moist air to breathe and grow, and that dry air chokes them out before they can build any real structure. So when you look at the raw model guidance for that basin, you have to read it carefully, because this is exactly where people get scared for no reason at all. Almost every single day, some individual model run will show a little spin-up appearing somewhere out there. But you have to look at whether that solution is actually trending across multiple runs and whether the different ensemble members actually agree with each other. Right now, when you dig into the ensemble spread, only a small fraction of the members show any real chance of even a weak system forming. The rest show the dry air simply overwhelming anything that tries to get organized. Any tropical wave that does roll through is more likely to just bring a surge of extra moisture and some locally heavy showers, rather than anything resembling an organized threat. And even in the scenarios where something does manage to hang together a little, the broader steering pattern is set up to sweep it out and curve it away from land, harmlessly out over open water, what forecasters sometimes casually call a fish storm, because it only ever threatens the fish. This lines up with the deeper atmospheric signals too. The guidance looking at the broader environment across the main development region for that basin, the stretch of ocean where the big, dangerous storms are typically born, points toward mostly unfavorable conditions, continuing not just for the next couple of weeks, but stretching out further into the season. And that is completely normal and expected for a season shaped by this kind of large-scale pattern. There may be some brief windows here and there where conditions look a little less hostile, but the overall theme should hold. The energy and the activity stay concentrated elsewhere, which is exactly why one basin keeps getting targeted while the other stays quiet. The main thing worth watching in the quieter basin going forward is not the deep tropics themselves, but the possibility of a front-driven system closer to the coastline later on, something that develops from an existing weather boundary rather than a classic tropical wave. That has been the pattern all season, and I expect it to continue. Now, with the tropics covered, let's get to what I genuinely think is the biggest story in this entire forecast, the part that is going to affect the most people by far, and the part where the newest data took a real turn, the weather pattern itself. And I have to be straight with you here because I know a lot of you have been holding on to the promise of relief, counting down the days until this stretch of uncomfortable weather finally breaks. Yes, there's a cooler front working its way through over the next several days, and for people farther north, it is going to feel genuinely pleasant for a stretch. I don't want to take that away from you because you have earned it, but here's the catch that keeps tripping people up when they only read the headline. That cooler air gets reinforced by warmer air again almost immediately behind it. So the relief is more of a flicker than a flood for a lot of the country. There is a stronger front expected the following week, and that one you will actually feel as a real noticeable drop in temperature for a few days. But right as we cross into the final stretch of the month, that cooler air pulls back out, and we go through another sharp pattern change. And this one swings the door wide open for warmth to come flooding back in with real intensity. Let me walk you through the mechanics behind this, because it is actually pretty straightforward once you see how the pieces fit together. Forecasters watch a handful of key large-scale signals to figure out what the atmosphere is about to do next. One of the most important ones sits over the higher latitudes of the Pacific. When that signal tips into a certain phase, it tends to build a ridge of high pressure in the western part of the continent and dig out a cooler trough across the central and eastern regions. That is exactly the mechanism that delivers the cooler air I mentioned. The newest data does show that shift arriving over the coming week, which is the relief that has been promised, and, to be fair, is genuinely on the way. But then watch how quickly the models pull that signal right back toward neutral, and in some runs, even flip it the other direction, shortly afterward. That flip back is what opens the door for the warmth to come rushing back in behind it. A very similar story is showing up in the signal watched over the higher latitudes on the other side of the ocean, the one that can occasionally send genuinely cold air plunging southward when it locks into the right phase. Just a short time ago, the data was pointing toward a real, more significant cold outbreak taking shape. But now the models are bringing that blocking pattern in only briefly, before whisking it away almost as fast as it arrived. So the cool shot is real, and I don't want to undersell it for the people who are about to enjoy it, but it is going to be brief, and I think it's important you hear that now rather than being surprised later. I know this is not exactly what everyone wants to hear, and I want to be clear about who I am and what this channel is actually here to do. I am not here to tell you only the things that feel good in the moment. I am here to give it to you straight, the encouraging parts and the difficult parts, and let you decide what to do with that information. because a comfortable version of the forecast that leaves out the hard part can leave you genuinely unprepared. And being unprepared when serious heat rolls back in is exactly how people end up getting hurt. So take this for what it is, stay updated with me, and remember that the atmosphere is always in motion, which means there is always a reason to keep checking back before you lock in your plans. Here is where the data gets specifically worth watching closely. There is a well-known tendency for one of the major forecast models to run a little too aggressive with cool anomalies, dragging them too far south and too deep into the pattern compared to how things actually verify. And on the newest runs, that same model is not only failing to push the cool air as deep as usual this time, it is actually building the warmth back in stronger than earlier runs suggested. Picture the pattern by the end of next week in that scenario. That more aggressive model shows a substantial area of above normal warmth, ballooning up from the south and stretching a long way north, with the cooler relief confined mostly to the far northern tier of the country. Now, the guidance that has generally verified more reliably over recent seasons does not fully buy that extreme northward surge of warmth. It keeps things a bit more measured, still delivering a genuinely nice cooler stretch up north, but not the widespread scorcher everywhere scenario the more aggressive model is hinting at. So the honest answer is probably something in between those two extremes. But the fact that the warmth keeps showing up stronger than earlier forecasts across multiple independent looks at the data is the real warning sign here, and it tells me the second half of this story is genuinely about heat returning, not about relief sticking around. This gets reinforced when you look at the official longer-range outlooks from the agencies that specialize in this kind of forecasting. Their guidance for the coming week to 10 days does show that cooler dip in the jet stream working through as expected, but it does not carry that cooler air very far south at all. Instead, there's a large area of above-average warmth signal locking in across a wide swath of the country. And the more detailed extreme heat outlook is even more pointed about it, flagging an elevated risk of dangerous heat building across a fairly wide zone as we move toward the end of the month, with a broader area around it, also carrying a real, if slightly lower, risk. But here is the thing you cannot lose sight of in all of this. You do not have to wait until later in the month for dangerous heat to become a real concern, because what a lot of areas are dealing with this very week is already shaping up to be some of the hottest stretch of weather so far this year in several spots. Forecasters are warning that a number of areas could see temperatures rivaling the hottest they've experienced all season, or in some cases the hottest in several years running. And the detail that makes this genuinely dangerous, more than the daytime high itself, is the lack of overnight relief that comes with it. In a lot of urban areas, overnight lows may not drop nearly as much as they normally would this time of year. That matters far more than most people realize, because the human body needs those cooler overnight hours to recover from the stress of the daytime heat. When the nights stay warm on top of hot days, the danger compounds day after day, and that is precisely the point where extended heat stretches start becoming genuinely dangerous rather than just uncomfortable. Let's talk about what that actually means for real people, because these are not just abstract numbers sitting on a map somewhere. At the level where heat becomes a real hazard, it threatens anyone without reliable, effective cooling or without enough access to proper hydration throughout the day. That is a much larger group of people than most of us think about day to day. Elderly residents, outdoor workers, people without dependable air conditioning, people who work double shifts and come home too exhausted to think about hydration until it's already a problem. And at the more extreme level, the category reserved for rare, long-duration heat with almost no overnight relief at all, you are looking at the most dangerous category there is for a heat event. And this kind of extreme risk is not confined to one small corner of the map either. It stretches across a wide swath of the country, building over the next couple of days, shifting and reorganizing toward the end of the week, and then settling in and holding on for an extended stretch heading into the following week. Let me give you some concrete numbers so you can actually plan around this instead of just worrying in the abstract. Over the next couple of days, temperatures climb well into dangerous territory across a large stretch of the southern and central parts of the country, while more moderate readings hold farther north for now. But the number that really matters here is the heat index, the feels like temperature once you factor humidity into the equation. Across a lot of the affected region, that feels like value is going to shoot well past what the actual thermometer reading shows, sometimes by a significant margin. Overnight, areas farther north are going to get a genuinely nice break, with temperatures dropping into comfortable territory for sleeping. But across the more affected southern zones, that is exactly where you stay stuck in stubbornly warm territory overnight, with essentially no real relief. And then the next day, the heat comes right back before the ground even has a chance to fully cool off, extending the dangerous stretch even farther north than the day before, with the heat index climbing right alongside the actual temperature. This brings me to something else I want you to weigh in on down in the comments, because this one could genuinely help someone reading through this later. For those of you living somewhere the nights just do not cool off during a stretch like this, what is the one thing that actually helps you get through it? Maybe it's a specific trick you use to keep your home cooler without running up your electric bill into the stratosphere. Maybe it's a hydration routine you swear by. Maybe it's a system you've set up for checking on an elderly neighbor or relative who doesn't always ask for help, even when they need it. Or maybe it's simply a place you go to escape the worst of it for a few hours in the middle of the day. Share your best tip, because there are people reading through this who are genuinely about to face some of the most dangerous heat of their entire year. And the practical wisdom that shows up in a comment section like this is honestly worth more than any single forecast I could ever give you. So let me pull all of this together into one clear picture, because I promised you the complete version at the start of this, and here it is in full. This week, storms continue rolling across the middle and eastern parts of the country, mainly a wind threat today with a narrow, more serious risk in one specific corridor, shifting toward a broader wind event tomorrow as it pushes farther east and reaches more densely populated areas. Out over open water, a system is spinning up and has real potential to strengthen quickly, bringing another round of heavy rain and gusty winds toward areas that, in some cases, are still recovering from the last system that came through. In the other ocean basin, the combination of a strengthening large-scale pattern, brutal wind shear, and persistent dry air keeps things remarkably quiet, with essentially nothing threatening on the horizon and any would-be systems likely to curve harmlessly away from land. And the headline, the thing that is genuinely going to touch the most lives out of everything we covered today, is the heat. A cooler front brings brief, welcome relief this week, and a stronger one follows next week, but neither one reaches deep enough south to change the overall trajectory for a huge chunk of the country. And right behind all of that cooler air, the warmth comes surging back with real intensity as we push toward the end of the month, bringing some of the most dangerous temperatures of the entire year so far, paired with dangerously warm overnight lows across a wide stretch of the southern half of the country. The reason I can tell you with confidence that the cooler front is actually coming is that the underlying atmospheric signals genuinely support it across multiple independent sources of data. And the reason I am telling you not to get too comfortable, that the heat coming back is the real story here, is that the newest data keeps pointing in that direction with growing confidence run after run. That is the difference between a forecast that just tells you what you want to hear in the moment and one that actually tells you what you need to know to stay safe over the coming weeks. The heat that is building behind this pattern is not just an inconvenience you push through and complain about at the end of the day. It is a genuine hazard, and the people who take it seriously ahead of time are consistently the ones who come through it just fine on the other side. So here's what I want you to actually do with everything we just went through. If this gave you the complete picture instead of just the comfortable half of it, hit that like button because it genuinely helps this get in front of more people who need the full version instead of just a headline. Please, seriously, drink your water even before you start feeling thirsty. Because once thirst actually kicks in during heat, like what's coming, it has already shown up too late to help you catch up. Check on your neighbors, especially anyone older living alone nearby, because a 2-minute knock on someone's door can make all the difference during a stretch like this. And don't forget about your pets either, because pavement gets hot enough to burn their paws long before it feels unbearable to you standing on it in shoes, and they are feeling every bit of this heat just as much as we are, if not more. If you are not already part of this community here, go ahead and subscribe and turn those notifications on because this pattern is moving fast, that system out over open water is still developing, and I am going to be right here breaking down every single change the moment the data shifts. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and how this stretch of weather is actually treating you where you are right now. I read every single one, and I will see you in the next update. Stay cool, stay alert, look out for the people around you, and remember, the atmosphere just showed its hand for the next couple of weeks, and now you know exactly what's coming behind it.